So my name is David, and I am an addict. And I am presently the Northern California representative consultant for the other bar. I've been doing this for about a year. So a lot of you I'm meeting for the first time. I've talked to you on the phone, and today I'm putting faces to voices, which is great. They told me I have to say a lot of personal stuff because this is supposed to be how you get to know me, so you're going to suffer. And then I was also told by Ernie it's supposed to be a long share, so this will be brutal. But I'll stick to the format. What it was like, my story, I should say, is it's not a, I'm glad nobody's having dinner, I will say, because it's not, there's aspects of it that aren't very appetizing, but I usually tell the whole brutal truth because it's, to me, if there's anything worthwhile about what I went through, it's that it maybe can scare the hell out of people and show them that no matter where they think they are, they can really go far, far down and have a lot of things go wrong and make it a lot harder to turn around than it had to be if they were able to get it together sooner. So my story is one of extreme denial and a very low bottom. And the big book talks about how defiance is one of the major characteristics of an alcoholic, and that was me to a T. My first conscious memory on this planet is having my hands balled up at my side, my face red or purple, and screaming up at my father and defying his authority. And I remember this was at my sister's first birthday party, and I'm 2 years older than she is, so I had to be 3 years old. And that's my first memory. I'd never wanted to do anything I was supposed to do, and I thought that I was smarter than everybody from the time I was this big. And, we have in this profession and as alcoholics and addicts, we have a little bit of problem with our egos. That was me, There's a reason why you got to get humility in this program. I had to be absolutely humiliated to get what I needed to get, to accept the truths I needed to accept about myself and embrace what was going to be necessary to embrace to turn my life around. It wasn't about humility, it was humiliation. It was grinding, abject suffering and poverty and literally starvation sometimes. It took me a long time to get there, and that fact that it did take me so long to get there is, I guess, why I was able to convince myself. I built up such a head of steam with good evidence as to why I was not going to ever have a problem with drugs, that it took a long time to break that down. I was a really high-functioning addict. Starting when I was 13, I smoked pot and had some drinks, and I remember, we were camping out in my parents' backyard in suburban Ohio, and me and my buddy, we snuck down to the rec room basement, and we each had 4 shots of scotch, 13 years old, and never having had a drink before, 4 shots of scotch got us pretty drunk. And we were in the backyard smoking cigars and laughing at the stars and making jokes and having this great time. And I remember thinking, this is really a good thing I've just come across here. I want to do this, a lot. And but an important thing happened, which was that, because it set in motion this thought process that I used right into where I was living in a dumpster. And the process went like this. Drugs and alcohol are great. They're my friend. I have fun. If you can't handle them, then you don't need to do them, but leave me alone. And what happened was this guy, my buddy, went in to use the bathroom at 4 a.m, and he took too long to come back, and I found him sprawled out on the kitchen floor, puking on my parents' floor. And I cleaned up his vomit and took care of everything and basically made sure that we didn't get caught. And we'd had the same amount to drink, so the message I got from this was, I am some kind of imbibing superhero. I know how to do this, and I always will know how to do this, and I'm always going to have to take care of these wimps who can't handle it, and that's just going to be the way it is, and that was the way it was for a long time. The first time I smoked pot, I remember thinking, my God, this is magic, and I bought some, and I rolled up a joint, and I thought that, it was like having a switch on my reality computer that said enhance, and I could press it. As long as I had that joint in my back pocket, I could be hiking in the woods, I could be seeing music, I could be at a party, I could be doing anything, reading a book, staying at home at night listening to the stereo, and I pressed that enhance button, and everything was better. And in my mind, there could not possibly be anything wrong with that. And this was the 70s, and it was before, drugs were bad and you were supposed to just say no. It was the age of consciousness alteration and Andrew Weil and the expanding mind, and I started taking this intellectual approach to drugs. I referred to it as consciousness alteration. And at one point, before I lost everything I owned, I had an entire wall in my bookshelf devoted to, I called them head books. Everything, everything about everything, peyote, drug, you name it, And there were magazine articles in Time and Newsweek back then touting cocaine as a drug that was not addictive. I don't know if you guys remember this. The reputable authorities supposedly saying that cocaine was not addictive, And I hadn't even gotten around to cocaine yet, but it sure was on my wish list when I read that. And so this was my MO, and I did this through my childhood, and and I was defiant, and I came across a couple other good tricks, which is one was that, we're all attorneys, so we all know what it's like to be an overachiever. We go to school and we realize that we got it together. The first time you raise your hand and you know the answer when nobody else does, hey, I'm one of the smart kids. Or remember they used to have you read and they'd put you in reading groups, group 1, group 2, and group 3. Well, if you got in group 1, your trajectory was set, and that's how I just was a superior little egotistical kid from the start. I thought I was, just the hottest thing. I hear people in meetings say that they feel like they never got the owner's manual on how to live life, and I felt like I wrote the owner's manual, or should have. That's where I was coming from, and I thought pretty much everything was bullshit, and the rules shouldn't apply to me, and that's how I lived my life. And I got away with everything by one simple trick, which is I figured out what it was I was supposed to do to satisfy everybody, and I did that. And then I used that as a license to do anything else I wanted to do. So, I had this discussion with my parents in the 10th grade. I said, Mom and Dad, I suppose you think I shouldn't smoke marijuana, right? Yeah. Well, why? And I had anticipated a pause before they could answer, so I provided the answer for them. I said, I know, it might hurt my health and it might harm my grades, right? And they said, that was good enough for them. They said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm getting straight A's and I'm healthy, right? So why don't you let me smoke pot, because I'm smoking it anyway and I don't want to hide it from you. And they fell for this deal. I guess they were liberal 70s parents. God bless them. That became the MO, As long as I'm not screwing up massively, I get to do what I want, and I did that. And so I got all this positive reinforcement. I was the guy who was on the football team but was also in the woods smoking a joint. And I was an Eagle Scout, but I got kicked out of the Boy Scouts because they found a bottle of wine in my tent on a camping trip. And in fact, that was the first consequence I had. I was an Eagle Scout who got kicked out of the Boy Scouts, and it was for a bottle of wine. And I go to college, and I wanted to be an attorney. I read this book by a guy named Michael Stepanian, who's a criminal defense lawyer in San Francisco. It was called Pot Shots, and he lived in San Francisco, and he was a criminal defense attorney, and he represented dope dealers, and that became my dream. That's what I wanted to do. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and I want to be a criminal defense lawyer and represent dope dealers and live in San Francisco. And then I found out about this neighborhood called the Haight-Ashbury, and I decided I wanted to live on Haight Street. And all those things came true. All of them came true. And I got my dream, and then I lost everything in my dream behind the fact that, as it turns out, I didn't have some kind of magic immunity from drugs and alcohol. So I went to college at Ohio State, and I was a big drug dealer on campus. I met these guys who dealt drugs, and I dealt drugs. And, Interstate 70 went from Michigan, or 75, went from Michigan State to Miami, and Interstate 80 went from New York City to San Francisco, and they crossed in Columbus, Ohio. And there were so many drugs on that campus, it was unbelievable. And I got my first taste of what became my drug of choice from somebody in my dormitory who gave it to me, and it was a diet pill. It was a speed pill, a Black Beauty they called them. And I stayed up all night. I got an A on my econ test. I went running 12 miles the next day, and I didn't eat for a day and a half. And I consider myself a rational person, and I reached a rational conclusion, which was this stuff is good for me. And I loved it. I absolutely had found what I was looking for. Because I like to keep my weight low, to run. I like to run and run fast, and I like to stay up all night, and I like to get good grades. This did all that for me. What could be wrong with that, Well, somewhere percolating around there was this rumor that, this was an addictive drug. But remember, the rules didn't apply to me. And so I didn't want the rules of nature to apply to me. So I didn't want to have to sleep, and I didn't want to have to eat, and I didn't believe that I would be subject to addiction, because that was for weak people. That was for the guy whose puke I had to clean up. So I started doing these things, and I got through college doing them. And I had this plan. I wanted to go to a good law school, and I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer in San Francisco. And I'm dealing drugs, and I'm getting straight A's in college. And so my first 15 minutes of fame were I graduated from Ohio State with a perfect academic record. And at the time, I was like the 23rd person to do this. I didn't get a single B or A minus the whole time. So they put me in the newspaper for this, and I cut the clipping out, and my parents were proud of it, and they had it on the wall. And 3 weeks later, I sold a bunch of LSD to a federal agent, and I made the newspaper again. And recent OSU honors grad arrested in largest direct sale of LSD in recent history. I found myself staring down the barrel of a loaded .38 and being put in handcuffs and hauled away to jail after I had sold 1,000 hits of acid to this DEA agent. And I had 3 words to say for the longest time, and they were, "Oh my God, oh my God." I saw my life flash before my eyes. The Rockefeller laws were in effect then. Now you get diversion for that in San Francisco, at least. I was looking at 2 counts of aggravated trafficking in excess of 3 times the bulk amount of a Schedule I substance, to wit LSD, each carrying a mandatory minimum 5 years in state prison. So I just got out of college. I got all these good grades, and I want to be a lawyer, and I'm going to jail. I had planned to spend that year, traveling around Europe and with a backpack and a loaf of bread and some cheese, and instead I spent the first 6 months fighting this case, and the second 6 months in jail. They sent me to jail. I did 6 months in a maximum security county jail in Franklin County, Ohio, when I was 22 years old. My 22nd year birthday, I was in jail. And so here's the next big thing that happens. First I'm cleaning up the puke, and I can maintain, which gets my mindset that I'm immune to this. Now I lose my entire future and my entire life by a drug-related consequence when I get arrested. And here's how I pull it back out. While I'm out on bail, I take the LSAT test, and I just creamed it. I just creamed this test. And so while I'm serving my sentence, I just get this idea, maybe I can still go to law school. So I take this little number 2 golf pencil that was all they would give you to write with in there, and I fill out my law school applications. I mail them to my mother. She proofreads them, types them up, mails them back to me. I send them in. My return address was the Franklin County Correctional Center. And I had to check the box, have you ever had a felony conviction? Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm doing time right now. Please write an essay explaining, and I wrote this. I would love to see this essay, because it must have been a masterful piece of bullshit, because, I claimed I had seen the error of my ways, and I fell in with the wrong group of people, and if they admitted me, I'd do them proud, and I was such a little egotist that I only was going to go to law school if I got into one of the really good law schools. So from my jail cell, I would only apply to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and Bolt, and I got accepted to all 4 of them from my jail cell. So I'm getting out of jail and getting in my car and driving to California to go to Stanford. So what does this tell me, though? What does this tell me? There is nothing wrong with drugs. Drugs got me into Stanford Law School. I took every test in the last 2 years of college on speed. I'm in jail, for God's sakes. And the only problem with drugs is that they're illegal, which they shouldn't be, because society is so full of shit, and I need to not get caught anymore. And that was what I did. And I showed my gratitude to Stanford Law School by getting out there and becoming the resident drug dealer at Stanford. You think I would have been chastened a little bit? No, man. I got out there and just immediately started, being the bad boy at Stanford. And I got through law school. But the thing that happened when I got to California was I looked around for the black beauties, and they didn't have any. I couldn't find any pharmaceutical speed. So I asked some people, where is this stuff, We don't have that out here, but we got this. What is it? It's crystal meth. It's a powder. Well, what do? You snort it. You don't take a pill. Oh, all right. So I was given my first street drugs, crystal meth, by a fellow law student at Stanford. And that's, people think, you got to go down to the gutter or the Tenderloin. Or I got my drugs at law school. And so I started snorting speed, and I did it for 3 years to get through law school. And I did it to study for the bar exam, and I did it to pass the bar exam. And I had been up for about 2 weeks before I went to take the bar exam. And while I'm taking it, there's proctors running around everywhere to make sure you're not cheating. And you're trying to get, elevated to the rank of an officer of the court to help enforce the laws of the state of California. And I was committing felonies at the exam table. I had hollowed out a big pen, and I didn't want to waste 5 minutes to go to the bathroom of exam time. So I would put little lines down on the table and act like I was having a hard time thinking of the answer to a question. And I'd put my head down and get that pen and come up and ready to go, And I passed the bar exam. And so now, I'm in California. I got a place to live on Haight Street. I got a job at the public defender's office. And I'm a criminal defense lawyer. And I'm meeting a lot of drug dealers. And I'm getting paid for my congenital attitude problem. Because, they hand you a bunch of files. They say, oh, here's your client. He's a criminal. There's the judge. There's the police. There's the DA. Go fuck with him, And that's what I did, And it was like, and I was in heaven. And this whole time, I pretty much was dependent on methamphetamine, but I told myself I wasn't in all the ways that we do that. I drive a nice car. I'm wearing a fancy suit. I went to a good law school. I can't be a drug addict. I can do without it for 3 days because I used to lay off for 3 days, and then I'd go back on for 3 days, or I'd lay off for 3 weeks and then go back on for 3 weeks. And every time I did that, I'd say, look, an addict can't do without it. I just did without it for 3 weeks. Never mind that the whole time I was doing without it, I was depressed, sleeping, and counting down the days to when I could pick it up again. But this is what I told myself. And I handled this stuff so well that I was a successful public defender. I was a popular guy in the Hall of Justice. I had a decent social life. I was healthy. I was running. I was making money. 3 or 4 years as a public defender, no consequences whatsoever. And I get back to my office one day, and my supervisor was waiting for me, and I was called into the assistant trial attorney's office and fired because someone had been looking for a stapler or something in my desk drawer and found a bundle of methamphetamine. And back then, our office was in the Hall of Justice, so I was going in and out of jails, in and out of courtrooms, always with a bundle of felony in my pocket at all times. And I would ask for a recess in a trial to do a line of speed in the judge's bathroom chambers to come out and finish a closing argument. And then I'd win the case, so you couldn't tell me that drugs were bad. And this was my worldview, And so this is what needed to be dealt with to get me to ever get better. That's what you started with. It's like, all right, let's help this guy. Holy crap, I wouldn't have wished me on anybody when it came time to trying to suggest that I had a problem or needed to get help. And so now I've been kicked out of the Boy Scouts. I've been to jail for 6 months, and I've been fired from my favorite job ever. And I still haven't got a clue that drugs are bad for me, or that I'm not all that I think I am, or that I'm headed for where I'm headed. I just, once again, come up smelling like a rose because I went across the street, I hung out my shingle, I opened up my own office, and all of my buddies at the public defender's office just started sending me all the conflicts cases, and people were coming in my door, putting money on my table, and I had this thriving solo practice almost instantly. And I had more money in a few weeks than I was used to making in months at the public defender's office. But now I had even more freedom to be the renegade I thought of myself as because I didn't have to punch a clock. I didn't have a boss. All I had to do was represent my clients and show up in court and do a good job. And so then it was really on, and I just took off from there. And I spent another 5 years doing speed and practicing, and I made more and more money, and I had more and more nice stuff, and I had fancy cars and nice vacations and good clothes and a pretty good reputation, and all fine up to a point. And what happened was my method of administration changed. And if you've never shot methamphetamine, I recommend that you don't. But I started shooting methamphetamine after 10 years of snorting it, and within 3 years I was convicted of felonies. I was evicted from my office, my house. I was broke, and I was basically living under a bridge. And the way I started, here's the other thing. When I started doing drugs, I said I'd never do hard drugs, and I ended up doing hard drugs. And when I started doing hard drugs, I said I'd never shoot drugs and use needles. I ended up using needles. And once I started using needles, I'd be at these dope dealers' houses, and I'd see these hardcore people once you shoot drugs long enough, your veins go away. And it's one of the, nicer ironies of which there are many about drug and alcohol use. It stops working. Well, literally, you can't get a vein anymore. And hardcore intravenous drug addicts, I'd see them in their bathroom sticking needles in their jugular vein, in their neck. And the first time I saw that, I was, oh my God, I may be using needles, but I would never do that. And I ended up doing that too. But when I did it, I was not in a bathroom with indoor plumbing and electric lights. I was sitting in a tent at the side of the San Francisco Bay in a field full of weeds in an abandoned railroad yard, holding a flashlight between my knees that was pointed at my neck and holding a little piece of broken mirror in my other hand and trying to get my hit of drugs, because that's where it took me. It's so funny the innocuous ways these things happen. So I'm snorting speed, and I'm successful, and I'm going to court. And I had this girlfriend who, had medical experience and also had hardcore drug experience. And she was clean and sober when I met her, and she knew I snorted this speed. And one morning I had a sinus infection and a sore throat, and I was sitting with my suit on, all ready to go to work and do battle. And I had this little line of crystal meth on the mirror in front of me, and I'm sitting there. And it's really hard on your sinuses and your throat. It just burns, and it's terrible. I already had a sore throat, sinus infection. I'm looking at this stuff, and I can't get out the door without it. And she comes in and sees what's going on. What's the problem, honey? I can't do this. What am I going to do? She goes and gets a syringe out of I don't know where and says, here, I'll take care of it for you. And she puts my little line of speed in a syringe, and I hand her my arm, and she gives me a shot. And it worked. Kicked in. It wasn't too much, didn't make me crazy, and I went to work, and it was fine. And the next day, I still had a sore throat and a sinus infection, and she was still there with a needle, and I said, hey, give me my medicine, and she did. And I never went back. I don't think I ever snorted speed again after that, because once you start, if you've been, drinking or eating something and you start smoking it, you'll never go back. And if you've been smoking something and you start shooting it, you'll never go back. There's just no comparison. And I never went back. And the other thing is, snorting methamphetamine is like getting on a train, slow train to go someplace. Shooting it is like getting on a roller coaster. You start doing it for the sensation and the rush, because the first time she gave me a really big hit of methamphetamine, it was the most amazing experience I had in my life. Unbelievable how it felt. There's never been anything in my life that felt the way that felt before or since. And that is the devil. That is my addiction. Because I, for years and years and years, tried to replicate that, and I was able to replicate it for a long time, and I had no consequences. But then as the way it works, things start. I was doing too many drugs. I wasn't paying my bills. I was not showing up in court. I wasn't, getting business. And I was getting out of control. I was losing weight. People in the Hall of Justice were talking about me. What's wrong with him? I was getting called on the carpet for failures to appear and being held in contempt. And I never committed malpractice, and I never really got in big trouble down at the Hall of Justice. But I was just a disaster. And I wasn't paying my bills. I wasn't opening my mail. I was avoiding the IRS because I was just slamming speed all the time, and trying to get a suit on and go to court. And I'd have to chew a mouthful of Valiums to counteract the speed, and I'd go sit in the front row, and I'd get just the right chemical equilibrium, and you sit there, and they're calling the private counsel matters, and I'm like, good, okay, and it would take 45 or 50 minutes for them to call my case, and in the meantime, the speed would wear off, and the Valiums would kick in, and I'd be nodding out, and I'd hear, Mr. Man, and I'd come to, and, get up and do my thing. I found out years later when I talked to people in the Hall of Justice that a lot of them thought I was a heroin addict and not a speed freak, because I was so exhausted I was passing out in the hallways and in the courtroom. It was not pretty. And but I was living on Haight Street, and I was representing dope dealers. So One of the good things about representing dope dealers when you're a dope fiend is that you can have them pay you with drugs. And this started to work very well for me. They offered, I accepted, and we had kind of a deal going. I started letting them pay me in drugs. I ended up making them pay me in drugs. And, it's not a real good idea when you're pretty visible. And, my car was a pretty visible car, and my motorcycle was a pretty visible motorcycle. They were both like these crazy fast things. And the cops knew what I was driving, and they knew what I was up to. And my motorcycle would be parked outside of speed dealers' houses all night long because I was in there with them. And so they were gunning for me, and they got me. A client was in jail and basically figured out that he could get out of jail by setting me up, and that's what happened. I was subject of a sting operation that culminated in me getting arrested in my office and hauled out on television in handcuffs. They busted the door down. They found speed. They had me on tape agreeing to smuggle the stuff into the jail, which I wasn't going to do, but I said I was just so the guy would leave it there with me. And I'm looking at 4 felonies, they kept me in my office in handcuffs for 3 hours, and I wondered why they're taking so long to take me across the street to the Hall of Justice. They were waiting for the TV vans to get there, and when they finally hauled me out, it was dark, and there were all these Klieg lights on, and I did the perp walk. I came out of my office, with the handcuffs on, and staring at the cameras, and I was featured on the evening news along with interviews with the sheriff of San Francisco, the police talking about how they've been trying to get me for a year and a half, and this was the culmination of all their good work. And I spent the night in jail, and I was arraigned in front of a judge whose house I'd had dinner at and who I'd played golf with. And I got out and I put my suit on and made 3 appearances in the building that day of cases I had pending. And then my attorney, who'd quickly been retained, calls me up and says, "Get over to my office." And he shows me these morning calendars that had been ripped down from 4 different courtrooms with my name circled on them, and in big red pen, "Get him out!" exclamation points. And the chief trial attorney for the DA's office had done this and messengered them over to my attorney's office, and the message was, "We don't want to see you in this building again, buddy. We got plans for you." And the plans were to put me in prison. And so once again, I'm fighting for my life, for my freedom, and 4 felonies. And I managed to get a disposition that involved a treatment program for 6 months, and I went up to Marin Services for Men and did 6 months treatment there. And the last 2 months, I was using drugs. You're supposed to get a job in there. I didn't get a job. I got a camper, and I parked the camper around this corner from the program. And after 4 months of being clean in there, I started shooting dope every day in my camper. And I was able to come in and eat meatloaf and sit at the dinner table with 15 other guys in a program, and then sit in meetings and go to meetings high as hell on methamphetamine and get away with it. And I remember sitting down and having this conversation with the woman who directed the program. Some of you from Marin may know her. She's a really revered figure in Marin recovery circles. Her name's Jennifer Reedon, a saint. And it's so good to see you here, so clear-eyed and so clear, and thinking so clearly, because you were such a mess when you got here. And she's telling me this stuff while I was high on methamphetamine. And what does my mind tell me? I've had tons of consequences. Jail, I got disbarred, by the way, as part of my disposition. Disbarment, everything. What does this tell me? This tells me that there's nothing wrong with drugs, because people can't even tell if I'm on them unless they test my urine. And I just need to continue to I need to learn how to not get caught, because this stuff is my friend. It's always been my friend. And this is the incredible, rock-hard head that I was born with or somehow acquired. A complete denial-ridden, egomaniacal lunatic is what I was, because that's where my head was at. When I've been using drugs in my camper in that treatment program, I'm thinking that drugs are still okay, I got out of there, and I got this little Ted Kaczynski cabin up in Novato, and I was holed up there, and I'm driving a whistle-stop wheels bus for $8.50 an hour, and driving 92-year-old ladies in wheelchairs around in the rain on the freeway up and down 101, so high on speed that I'm hallucinating. And because I'd try to plan it so I wasn't that high when I was driving, but sometimes I still was. And every time I'd say this prayer to myself, please, God, don't let me kill these ladies. Don't let me kill these ladies. I'll never do this again. Please don't let me kill these ladies. And I'd take them to bingo, and they've gotten through 92 years of life and managed to survive. And I'm driving them up and down Highway 101 in the rain, hallucinating on methamphetamine, and thank God, I didn't kill anybody. And I got fired from that job. Long story short, I got evicted from the place in Nevada, and now, I've gotten smaller and smaller versions of my stuff. I used to have a bunch of stuff. Now I got not much, and it's all in this truck. And I drive it down to the China Basin area of San Francisco, where they were building the stadium back then, 1997-8. And I live in this truck down there for about 7 months. And I have no money whatsoever, so now I'm scrounging. I'm stealing mountain bikes and hustling, I'm doing the recycling deal, stealing wire and burning it around campfires at night to melt the plastic off. Then you take it to the metal place. You work your butt off for about 12 hours and you get $13.60, and you go give it to the dope guy, and then you shoot your drugs. Then you get high for a while, and I call it the poverty rehab program because I got high about every 3 days, and then I would crash for 2 days. Then I'd drag myself out of my truck, and I'm looking around out there, in the abandoned railroad yards, figuring out what's next. And people taught me how to survive out there. A lot of my clients were out there, and they welcomed me, and and I stayed out there for 11 months, and it got worse and worse, and I didn't know what I was going to do about it. I couldn't figure out what to do. I just thought, I needed to get a little job working on a loading dock. Then I needed to save my money and get a single-room occupancy hotel room. Then I'd get a little better job, then get a little better room, and and just sort of leapfrog my way back to where I had some kind of life. And it never occurred to me that Project One was going to have to be stopping drugs. That wasn't in the plan. I just needed to get my life back together. And the drugs were just sort of, a given, I guess. And I weighed about 135 pounds, and I'm dragging my butt out there, living my sorry life. And I came back to my truck one day, and where it had been parked, it was gone. No truck. And I'm standing on the sidewalk, tons of felony convictions, disbarred, 135 pounds, homeless, broke, and the truck is gone. Well, the truck was, first, it was my house, but secondly, it had everything I had left in it, which wasn't much, but, it had my family photograph album. It had a little shoebox full of my Boy Scout merit badges and my Eagle badge. It had a bundle of love letters from my college sweetheart wrapped in a rubber band. It had my law school diploma. It had the only copy of my undergraduate honors thesis. There's certain, the things that you would grab in your house if there was a fire, and you hope you're never going to lose. That's what was still in that truck, and it was gone. And I'm standing there, 40 years old, and I would like to tell you that was my bottom, but it wasn't. I spent the entire winter of 97, 98 outdoors in San Francisco, and if you look it up, it's on record. It's the coldest, wettest winter there has ever been in San Francisco. And I slept in tents. I slept in cardboard boxes. I climbed into dumpsters to sleep. I learned how to eat out of dumpsters. I knew where you could get the day-old sandwiches. I ate at the shelters, Glide Memorial, the soup kitchens. Sometimes I'd ride the bus all night if I could get $1 together to stay warm. I sat around campfires all night, and I basically wanted to die, but I didn't have whatever it takes to kill myself. I don't know if it's cowardice or courage, but I didn't have it. And I didn't know what I was going to do. Every day, you talk about one day at a time, it was one day at a time. I'd wake up different place every day, and I'd look at the sun come up, and shit, man, I'm still alive. Now what? And I would just grind through that day, wishing I could just go away, and I couldn't go away. I wanted there to be a place where you just turn yourself in, Here I am, get Dr. Kevorkian, and I'm done. And there is no place like that, And so that was what was going on, and it went on and went on and it went on. And so what happened, this is what finally it took to get me, I was getting more and more ready. A friend of mine, an old dope dealer buddy of mine, was in a program, and he would drive by in this car and toss me a few food stamps once in a while and ask me how I was doing and say, hey, I can get you in this place, It was this program out in Hunters Point where you could get in for your food stamps and your GA check. And he said, hey, we got a bed whenever you're ready. I said, yeah. I wasn't going to go. So one night I had this camp with a sleeping bag about 3 miles out of town, and I left and walked way in towards town, the bottom of Potrero Hill, to try to crash on my buddy's couch, and which he would let me do once in a while. And I got there. This is July 24th, 1998, my sobriety date. I got there, and he was not home. And I waited and waited and waited. It got really late, and he didn't come home. Now I'm 3 miles from my camp, and it's late, and I'm really tired, and I'm crashing from drugs. I said, what the hell? I'll just sleep in this playground over here. So there was this playground, and they had this sliding board with this wooden structure and this elaborate log cabin type of deal underneath it, and a sandbox. And it was a better house than I had a lot of other times. So I just slept there, and it was warm. It was a summer night, and I laid down with no blanket, no jacket, no sleeping bag, no any. I just laid in this sand and went to sleep. And anybody who knows San Francisco weather in the summer knows that this is what can happen. I woke up at 3 in the morning, and I was soaking wet, and I was shivering uncontrollably. The wind had kicked up, the temperature had dropped about 20 degrees, and the fog had rolled in, and I was looking at the streetlights, and there were these big, puffy clouds, the kind that just hit you in the face and make you wet. And I'm shivering uncontrollably, and I've been wanting to die for a long time. And I weigh 137 pounds, and I'm hungry, and I'm crashing from drugs, and I look like shit. And it's 3 in the morning, and I get up and start walking around just like a feral animal trying to find some way to get warm. And couldn't find any. Usually you can find stuff. I've done this before. I couldn't find anything, not a discarded rag. And I pulled up underneath a streetlight at the side of this park, and I just broke completely. And I can remember, my fists were balled up, and I put my head up and was screaming at the sky, and there were tears and water rolling down my face, and I just was screaming in anguish. And the one thing I said was the word, what? 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 Because I didn't know what. And I settled down, I calmed down a little bit, and went over to my buddy's house, and his truck was there. He's a house painter, and I stole a tarp out of his truck, and I took it back to my little sliding board, rolled up in it, and got warm. And as I was going to sleep, all warm and toasty in there, I'm like this little speed freak burrito. I'm wrapped up in this tarp, and I'm thinking, I'm in a playground. Tomorrow's Sunday morning. There's going to be kids, mothers, and if I don't get out of here, there's going to be cops. So I got to get my ass out of here in the morning. Well, sun came up, birds were singing, I was warm, I was asleep, I didn't care. I just didn't care. So I'm ignoring all this. I can hear kids, and eventually something starts to poke me in my tarp, and it wouldn't go away. Poke, 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 wouldn't go away. Poke. I'm like, get out. And I stick my head out, and there's this little blonde girl, like a little angel with her hair silhouetted against the blue sky. She's about this high, and she's poking me with a stick. And she says, "Is he alive?" Good morning. So her mother comes and scoops her up and says, "You didn't touch anything, did you? You better come and wash your hands." And then she says, "Come away from that man. He's just sleeping." So she hauls the kid away. There's about 3 mothers with 7 kids for their morning outing on the playground, and they've all been told they can't play on this sliding board because that man is underneath it. And, of course, this makes it the most desirable piece of playground equipment there is. So they're off to the side. Can we go yet? Can we go yet? No, he's still there. And I'm trying to extricate myself from my tarp and drag my ass out of there. And I pull on my baseball cap because I had the long hair and that goatee and the leather jacket, just like all the other speed freaks, and a jaw. And I'm dragging my ass out of there, and as I'm leaving, one of the mothers decides to use me as an object in a lesson in life. And I don't know to this day if she thought I could hear her and wanted me to, or didn't think I could, or didn't care. But she says to these little girls as I'm hauling out of there, "So who knows what we need to do so we never have to live like that man?" Well, last night I was screaming at the sky and hollering, "What?" I'm not a total idiot. When she said that, I had the briefest moment where I was going to pull up short, tip my baseball cap up, and say, "Tell him not to go to Stanford Law School." Thankfully, I didn't. What I said to myself was, "Damn, it's time you learn what you need to do so you can stop living like this." And I turned around and hiked my ass out to that treatment program I'd been invited into and presented myself at the door and said, "Can I come in?" And they looked at me and they said, "Man, you look ready, but you can't come in." And they made me hike back downtown to the Oznom Detox Center, which is, if anybody knows detox in general, it doesn't get much rougher than the Oznom Detox Center. And I laid on a mat in that place for 3 days, with stinking feet and people throwing up and screaming and talking at night and farting and burping and unbelievable, crazy 30 people on a floor on mats this far apart. And I stayed there because that was the best place I'd had to sleep in a long time. And I went back out to the program and they let me in, and it was me and 14 ghetto kids who were mostly crack addicts. And boy, did they like to boss around the lawyer guy, and I got really some serious humility. They had me cleaning the bathrooms with toothbrush, and I was the low man on the totem pole, and I'm locked in this house, and it's August, and all my speed freak friends are running by on their bikes outside, and I'm jonesing for drugs, but here I am, and I didn't want to stay, and I still didn't want recovery, and I still thought this whole thing was bullshit, but I stayed, and here's why I stayed. A few days in, they told me to make a gratitude list, and I said, "Are you out of your mind? What do I have to be grateful for? I may have HIV, I may have, Hep C, I weigh 135 pounds, my family thinks I'm dead, I'm broke, I'm disbarred, I'm convicted of felonies, I got no money, I got no car, I got nothing. Gratitude list." They said, "Be creative, make a gratitude list." So I racked my brains and I made my first gratitude list, and it had 3 things on it: a bed, food, and a hot shower. That was it. And they said, "Look at it every morning and be grateful." So I did. And I can remember I used to stand in that hot shower and let the water run down over my abscessed arms and my emaciated body, and it was heavenly. And while I was doing that, I'd say, "Thank you for this shower," gratitude. And I had not known where I was going to sleep on any given night for so long that now I have this clean bed in this room with sheets and a pillowcase. And during the day, we'd have all these meetings all day, and we'd get these little breaks. I used to tip down the hallway and visit my bed. I'd look in at it and say, "Hey, hi, bed, see you tonight." I couldn't believe that bed was just waiting for me, empty all day. And I'd sit down and eat this food. So that was my gratitude list. And then I decided I really wanted to go. I had to go. But what happened was this. I'm looking down the steps to the doorway, and my buddy's going by with their drugs out there and freedom. And I'm realizing it wasn't locked. I could go whenever I wanted. But the minute I went, I could have my drugs, and the shower was going to go, and the food was going to go, and the bed was going to go instantly. So that was my first step. That was my realization. I got drugs and life, and I used to be able to mix them. Then I had no life and only drugs. Now I'm getting a little bit of life back, food, shower, and a bed. But there's this bright line, man, and the minute I cross it, I'm going to lose those only 3 things I can think of to be grateful for. And that's why I stayed. That's the only reason I stayed. And it got me, I stayed, and they took me to meetings, and I read, and I did the steps, and I worked with a sponsor, and I got it. It kicked in, and I got it. And I had some really good teachers, and I got hungry for recovery, and I just made it. The first job I had was for $8.50 an hour at a homeless shelter where I used to go in to take showers, and I got my first paycheck, maybe $600 or $700 for 2 weeks, not even that after taxes, and I got my second paycheck, and it came with a notice from the IRS that I owed them $137,000, and they were going to be taking all my money for as long as possible. And I just wanted to go shoot dope. What the hell? I'm never going to redeem myself. How can I get over this? I'm working for $8.50 an hour, and they want all my money. And this impossible. I could work here for 10 years and not pay this off. But I remember one thing somebody told me: call your sponsor. So I called my sponsor. And the sponsor said, "All right, calm down. Look at that notice. Does it have a phone number on it?" "Yeah." "All right, well, call them up. Put them off." I did it. I put them off. Well, I put them off for 10 years, and then I got an attorney to represent me, and I settled my whole debt to the IRS almost at my 10-year sobriety birth date for $900. And that's how everything has been, I put one foot in front of the other. I've done what I've been told, and things have gotten better, And they told me to pray, and I had no idea how to pray. But somebody said, please and thank you are the 2 best prayers, so do that. And so I started praying, and I just say thank you for a lot of stuff. and I'd say please for a lot of stuff. Mostly help me stay clean, help me, be a good person, help me whatever I need, be strong, help me be loving, help me be humble. And I kept doing the gratitude list. And then I combined the prayer and the gratitude list. Since I was saying please and thank you, to this day, 10 years later, it's really handy because I start off every day, I wake up and I'm in the bed, and it's a really nice bed now. So before I even get out of the bed, I say thank you for this bed. And then, if I go get in the shower and I'm in the shower, thank you for the shower. So I'm doing my gratitude list and my form of prayer. And I go out, sit down and have something to eat for breakfast, a cup of coffee, thank you for the food. And I start my day like that. And that's because I need to start my day being reminded of the fact that I'm a drug addict, because drugs took away everything from me, and I know they will do it again if I give them half a chance. So, I've made my life about recovery. I've decided to work in the field, be a counselor. The second job I got after the homeless shelter was at the program where I'd been as the night manager, and I drive the bus around and take people to meetings. And, so now I'm getting paid right away to stay clean and sober. An asshole like me needs a lot of motivation to stay clean and sober, so they gave me a paycheck to stay clean and sober, and I did it because the deal is for me is that my addiction is a devil, it's a demon, and I need every possible tool I can come up with to keep it at bay, because 12 years from my last shot of speed, I can still be sitting, my veins are coming back, and I can be sitting around watching television at night, watching Intervention on television, and I'll subconsciously be holding my arm, pumping it, and petting the veins. And I'll look down and go, wow, I could hit that. And then I just go, because there's that devil telling me, remember how that felt? You could do that again. You did it for years without any consequences. Just don't go so far this time, Remember that? And so that guy's always going to be there, and that's my legacy of my addiction. But I have tons of tools, and I keep them handy everywhere I go. I'm looking for one more tool to put in my toolbox, because the first 5 I pull out might not work. I might need the 6th one, the 7th one, And real quickly, some of the ones that really work for me, is accountability. I make sure that I used to set my world up so I could get away with a relapse. I knew I turned a corner, and even a few years into my recovery, I set my world up so I could get away with a relapse. Now I set my world up so I will have maximum consequences and be caught as predictably as possible. So if you've known me for longer than about 10 minutes, you know I'm a methamphetamine addict. Because if I show up Monday morning at the office and I'm sweaty and my eyes look funny and I try to tell you I have the flu, I want your first thought to be, BS, you have the flu, you're back on drugs, because that'll get me caught and save my life. And I work in the field where I'm almost always subject to random testing, and I like that because that'll get me caught. And if I get caught, I just don't have to raise my hand as a newcomer. I have to lose my job, and I don't want to lose my job, And if my wife is going out of town for a week, I am not my best company. Leave me to myself, and man, that thing starts talking to me. So if I know she's going, I'm going to be alone for a week, I'll make sure I have a speaking commitment on Saturday. I'll make sure I got to go pick 3 ladies up at the hospital auxiliary on Friday and take them to a medical appointment. I will book myself, because that's another tool. When I'm strong, I put things in place to cover me when I know I'm going to be weak. And I just have dozens and dozens of these tools, and I use them, and I need them, every one of them, to stay clean and sober. So here's, the upshot of all of it is, I was an intravenous 135-pound homeless dope fiend living in dumpsters, and 12 years later, the promises have come true in me, and for so many ways it's beyond belief. My biggest fear these days is that I'm going to have a car accident driving around because I can't see out of my pink cloud. Literally, I've got this old guy who was my first sponsor. I tell him I'm on a pink cloud, and he's so funny. His name's Willie. He says, David, did they tell you yet? Did they tell you yet? He said, what, Willie? Did they tell me what? About the pink cloud. He said, what? Did they tell you that it won't last? I said, yeah, people tell me that all the time. And Willie, bless him, he says, don't believe him. All you have to do is insist on it, and it will last, And I've decided to insist on it. And, I've never owned a house before, and I bought one about 7 months ago at the bottom of the market for a ridiculously low interest rate. never managed to get married before, and I got married a couple years ago to this fabulous, fabulous woman who loves me dearly and really knows me and loves me anyway, who's more together than anybody I've ever met. And we've been together for 3 years, and we haven't had a single argument. And I've never been drunk or high around her, and I've never lied to her, and I've never been unfaithful to her. And I have the opportunity to go to my grave, God willing, being able to say those things are still true. And you know, there's a line in that movie that Jack Nicholson, "You make me want to be a better man." And my wife, when no other higher power is doing it for me, she does it for me. You know, she makes me want to be a better man. And you know what? The interesting thing about it, though, when I met her, you know, you're worried about meeting the in-laws. You're worried about all these things. You're worried about whether you deserve this. And here's the best part of the promises that have come true for me. When I met my wife and I saw how great she was, it didn't even occur to me that I didn't deserve her, because that part of the promises have come true for me. You know, I like myself these days. I know who I am, and I'm a good person. You know, I'm doing a good life here. You know, I'm not perfect. There's better people than me, but you know, I knew that I would meet her parents, and I knew they would be happy that their daughter was going to marry me. And to have that feeling when you've spent your whole life feeling like you're an imposter and doing everything you can to anesthetize yourself and basically destroy yourself is rewarding beyond belief, you know, and that's what this program is all about. So I am, you know, they say you don't regret the past and wish to close the door on it. I would do it all again exactly as it was. I wouldn't change a thing, because it took what it took to get this hardcore drug addict to right here, right now. And I can't argue with the process if I like the result. And it's really, really an honor to be part of this organization, and it's more of an honor to be allowed to serve you and do what I do. And I'm just really, really happy to be here and to be clean and sober. Thank you so much.